Nicholas Roerich was a very advanced spiritual soul with considerable vision. Nicholas Roerich was also a Rosicrucian. He was also a member of other secret societies.
Roerich was a Russian painter and mystic who was deeply involved in theosophy and the teachings of Madame H.P. Blavatsky. He is famous for his travels into Tibet and the Far East in search of the legendary kingdom of Shambhala. But what was his relationship to FDR's Secretary of Agriculture?
I believe that Nicholas Roerich was a spiritual teacher, not a supreme spiritual teacher, but was a teacher of Henry Asgard Wallace.
Roerich was considered not only a teacher, but a spiritual mentor and guru to Henry Wallace. It's believed that Wallace recommended the Great Seal to FDR because of the mystical influence Roerich held over him.
The dollar bill was approved with the all-seeing eye and the truncated pyramid with the all-seeing eye on the top of the because of Nicholas Roerich.
In the book, Tournament of Shadows, the authors document much of the activities and influence of Roerich during this period. They write that Roerich's influence was suspected in the adornment of the $1 bill, with a verso of the Great Seal showing a pyramid crowned by an all-seeing eye. The story of Wallace's role with FDR is told by the State Department in an official history called The Eagle and the Shield, a history of the Great Seal of the United States.
Henry Wallace, while sitting in the State Department, found a booklet on the Great Seal of the United States.
Wallace recollects that day in letters he wrote in 1951 and in 1955. He says, turning to page 53, I noted the colored reproduction of the reverse side of the seal. The Latin phrase Novus Ordo Seclorum impressed me as meaning the New Deal of the ages.
In terms of the dollar, if there's a code about the New World Order, I think that they jumped a few decades from the New Deal, because the Novus Ordo Seclorum can be translated to the New Deal in English as easily and readily as to the New Order or the New World Order.
Initially, Wallace envisioned the Great Seal appearing on a coin. He took the idea to President Roosevelt.
So when Henry Wallace saw this booklet and saw this pyramid in the eye and the triangle, he was a Freemason. He was a member of a secret society. Immediately he said, whoa, what a symbol to have and not use. Let's use this. So it was he that went to the president, FDR, and FDR, being a Freemason, looked at those symbols and said, hey, yes, wow, this is, that's New Order of the Ages, what's the New Deal? He actually thought, to a degree, that the Novus Ordo Seclorum was the New Deal.
Wallace wrote that Roosevelt, as he looked at the colored reproduction of the seal, was first struck with the all-seeing eye, a Masonic representation of the great architect of the universe. Next, he was impressed with the idea that the foundation for the New Order of the Ages had been laid in 1776, but that it would be completed only under the eye of the great architect. Roosevelt, like myself, was a 32nd degree Mason. He suggested that the seal be put on the dollar bill rather than a coin, and took the matter up with the Secretary of the Treasury. The Secretary of the Treasury at the time was Henry Morgenthau.
And he talked to Henry Morgenthau, who was the Secretary of the Treasury, and got him convinced that we should put this esoteric emblem from the back of the Great Seal of the United States onto the back of the dollar bill. This really symbolized the fact that now the esoteric influence dominated the American government.
And Morgenthau, the Secretary of Treasury, wrote extensively about this point, and he said there's some strange cabal, some mystical order behind the scenes, calling shots on the artwork that appears now on our dollar bills. He had to approve it, and he later had found out that this was all Henry Wallace's. It was all based on Henry Wallace's relationship to Nicholas Roerich. Nicholas Roerich is the person who is responsible for that ending up on the dollar bill.
Today, the story of Roerich's mystical influence is told by a variety of occult researchers.
You know, the dollar bill thing was about the New World Order. Actually, that came from Franklin D. Roosevelt and others around him, even Nicholas Roerich.
It's almost like baseball. Roerich to Wallace to FDR to the dollar bill.
While many people have never heard of Roerich, he was a well-known figure during the FDR era, in the years preceding World War II. His works of art were internationally recognized, so much so that an entire building in New York was erected to house his many paintings. Roerich was nominated 3 times for the Nobel Peace Prize and was the inspiration for the Roerich Peace Pact, which was signed by Henry Wallace in the presence of President Roosevelt at the White House. In 1986, Mikhail Gorbachev called Roerich one of the cultural pillars of Russia. The Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, the first man in outer space, when asked what the Earth looked like from orbit, answered, very much like the paintings of Nicholas Roerich.
He was a great oil painter, bar none. He's one of the greatest in terms of the Himalayan Altai scenes that he depicted. He did some wonderful work. He was a gifted artist.
But Roerich's story is one of success and disgrace, as he eventually fell out of favor with his greatest supporters, and at one point was suspected by the Soviets, the Japanese, and the United States of being a spy.
Information was coming out that Roerich may have been used as a spy when he went into these other nations in the Far East. And with that, that's what broke the link between Henry Wallace and Nicholas Roerich.
To learn more about this mysterious figure and his influence on the dollar bill, we travel to the Roerich Museum in New York, along with cipher expert and international codebreaker Buff Perry, who has long been associated with the museum and its curators.
Here we are at the Nicholas Roerich Museum at 319 West 107th Street, almost at the corner of Riverside Drive. His paintings hang on the walls of 3 floors of this building, and also many of the treasured archives, letters, and other writings and memorabilia of the Roerich family are housed here. I have a deep interest in the history of Nicholas Roerich and his family and their association with a long-lost artifact that I have had a lot to do with over the years.
We'll learn more about this artifact later on, as it ties together Nicholas Roerich with Henry Wallace, Manly P. Hall, and what some believe will be the future destiny of America. Like many who are involved in New Age and occult ideas, Nicholas Roerich dreamed of a united one world order.
Nicholas Roerich is seen as one of the key individuals, historical individuals, that had a lot to do with the development of the League of Nations and subsequently the United Nations, and is recognized as such in the United Nations building. I'm told, I haven't seen such commemoration, but I'm told it's there. And the history of the United Nations is often characterized in association with Nicholas Roerich's global peace efforts.
Roerich's dream was shared by his disciple, Henry Wallace, as demonstrated by the book Henry A. Wallace, His Search for a New World Order. This concept is visualized by the cracked bronze globe that sits outside the United Nations building, where a new world is literally breaking forth from the old. But somehow, Rorick's ideas on the subject would get him into trouble with Wallace when he traveled abroad on behalf of the United States government. In the book, Tournament of Shadows, we read that Rorick had been chosen by Henry Wallace to scour Central Asia for drought-resistant grasses to combat the Dust Bowl. This was the genesis of the Rorick expedition, financed and staffed by the Department of Agriculture. But during his 2-year expedition, Rorick seemed to be on a mystical journey, one that involved his quest for the legendary city of Shambhala, and literally searching for signs of the second coming of Christ.
Nicholas Rorick's idea was that the second coming of Christ may happen within years, and that's why he visited India, China, etc., and Russia, and digging up and trying to locate spiritual centers and spiritual information along those lines.
Authors Meyer and Bryzak write that the search for Shambhala, which he identified with the second coming of Christ, and the Maitreya, or Buddha to come, obsessed Rorick. His paintings and writings thereafter conjured up his vision of a new age of peace, brotherhood, and enlightenment. But Rorick's concept of Christ, shown here in one of his paintings, was dramatically different from that of traditional Christianity. Both Rorick and Wallace were members of the Theosophical Society that was founded by Madame H.P. Blavatsky in the late 19th century. Blavatsky's view of religion can be summed up in her book, The Secret Doctrine. She makes use of the phrase, Demon est Deus inversus, which means the devil is God inverted. Her view was based on the ancient Gnostic belief that in the Garden of Eden, the serpent who tempted the woman was really an angel of light, and that God, who had created Adam and Eve, was really the devil. The reason is because God had forbidden man from partaking of the tree of knowledge, or gnosis. This is the origin of the term Gnostic, or Gnosticism. Blavatsky further argued that Jesus was only one Messiah among many, like Buddha, Krishna, and Muhammad, and that the fifth Buddha, also called the Maitreya, is the last Messiah who will come. She says he will appear as Maitreya Buddha, the last of the avatars, or way-showers. This belief and expectation are universal throughout the East. This is the event that is said to have consumed Nicholas Rorick, and that he would have taught to his devoted disciple, Henry Wallace. The proof of their bizarre relationship was more fully revealed in a series of letters penned by Wallace to Nicholas Rorick.
Newsweek with Westbrook Pegler and others made a very big story out of what they called the Guru letters, the letters that Henry Wallace would send to Nicholas Rorick, which obviously he considered him a spiritual teacher from that standpoint.
Wallace had gone from being Secretary of Agriculture to FDR's Vice President. Though his falling out with Rorick had happened some years earlier, the Guru letters would surface once he decided to run for president. They had been obtained by cantankerous news columnist Westbrook Pegler through an unidentified source. Pegler, along with H.L. Mencken, questioned Wallace in a news conference about the letters, but he was, at best, evasive and refused to answer their questions in a direct manner. The letters were signed H.A.W., assumed to be Henry Asgard Wallace. In one of the letters, Wallace allegedly wrote of curing his headaches at formal dinners by rubbing his forehead with a Tibetan amulet. In another letter, he said to Rorick, "I have been thinking of you holding the casket, the sacred, most precious casket, and I have thought of the new country going forth, and I have thought of the admonition, Await the stone, the sign of Shambhala.
There's these letters, and they indicate very strongly, no matter how you want to interpret them, that he was his teacher.
Wallace went on to say, "We await the stone, and we welcome you again to this glorious land of destiny." The stone he's referring to is the artifact that cipher expert Buff Perry has been following for many years now. We learned about this mysterious stone during our first interview with Perry at Manly Hall's Philosophical Research Society, where a statuette of Nicholas Roerich, holding a casket like the one described by Wallace, sits on one of the tables in the library. It was first mentioned to us by Dr. Obadiah Harris.
Now, Dr. Harris, can you tell us about this statue here?
Oh well, this would be a very favorite thing to Manly Hall. This is Nicholas Roerich.